Good morning, my dear students, and I welcome you back to the online classes. I hope you have gone through the videos and you are not skipping any of it, because if you do, you won't be able to understand the chapter. Now, not wasting much time, let's begin the chapter with a quick recall of what we have done in the previous video. In the previous videos, we people have seen that we have started the new chapter, The Enemy by Pearl S. Buck, in which we came across one doctor, a Japanese doctor named Dr. Sadao Hockey. And this chapter, as I told you, is been written in the limelight of the war which broke out, and in which Japan and America, they were two hostile countries. And in the beginning part, we people have seen about Dr. Sadao, his house, where it was situated, about his father, his father's dream, and how he was sent to America at the age of 22, and at 30 when he returned. He has fulfilled his father's wish by becoming a famous surgeon of Japan, not only a surgeon but a scientist. Also, we saw that when the war has broken out and a doctor is needed at the battlefield, why he was not sent with the troop, because of two reasons. First one being, a scientist, he was trying to bring perfection to one of the discoveries which could clean the wound clearly, entirely. And the second reason was that the old general of the Japanese army, he was under medication and could need an operation anytime, and because of these two reasons he was not sent along with the battle troops. Then we have seen, while he was standing in the veranda of his house, he was just introspecting the way, the atmosphere and his past life, and he was just looking at the atmosphere, how it was chilling out there with the combination of the summer weather and the cold waves, and how it was forming the mist covering everything around, and very soon his house will be all under the mist, and he will go inside to his wife Hannah and the two children. At that instant she came out, and he started going back into the memory lane, where he started talking to us about how he met Hannah, how he stopped himself from falling in love with her, because he was never in a way to hurt his father. He wanted his father's approval. And then he spoke about where he actually met Hannah, in his professor's house. And also we have seen that while they both were just standing there with Hannah, uh, putting her arms across Sadao's arm and affectionately keeping her cheek over his arm, and they both were just thinking and were too deep in love. Suddenly they found that when kind of a figure raised up from between the mist out of the ocean, like as if though the ocean has thrown that figure out of itself, and it looked like that of a human figure. And then suddenly they just bent over the rail to have a look over that thing, or you can say to have a clear look of it, that figure, or you can say the shadow which they felt from far, that black figure, it just stood up on the leg, and then it found it very difficult to move, it seemed like, because it was just staggering itself. And then after that he fell on the stomach, the figure, and I think his face was totally buried in the sand right over there at the beach side. And seeing this, Hannah, she cried and she said, "What is all this?" And then Sadao's, he just he thought that maybe it might be a fisherman, because that side, one side of their house, was having rows of fishermen, and in one of the fishermen, he might have gone on his boat, and an accident might have taken place, and he somehow managed to come through the water. But he knew that on the beach side there were sharp rocks under the water, under the surf, and that's why he was worried that if that man had come out, he might be having lots of wounds on his body, he might be ripped apart from many parts, many places. of his body. And because of that reason, he just came out from the veranda. He ran towards that side where the figure has fallen down, and he was followed by his wife, and they reached near that place. And as was expected, blood could be seen on one side of that man's body. He was on his stomach, okay, the face literally buried into the sand. And then it was time that he was supposed to see who's that man, because he was having a cap which was totally looking like as if though it had been rags of garments hanging on to him, very old, like that sort, means from days it had been there with him. And then Sadao, he knelt down and he turned the body to see or to have a look at the face of that man. And then they both were shocked because it was a white man, an American. An American, in the sense that when the war broke out between Japan and America, front of two Japanese, there it was lying a wounded American's body. Now further, yes, it was a white man, and then the wet cap has fallen away, and his yellow hair could be seen very clearly, and his face seemed to be very tortured, means it seemed like as if though he has gone through very bad days. He was totally unconscious, not knowing anything about what was going on right now. And suddenly Sadao remembered about the wound from where the blood was coming out, and then his expert fingers, he was a doctor after all, his expert fingers started running through his body, and he found what was the reason of that wound. On the lower side, right side, on the lower back side, there was a gun wound, and he could feel the gunpowder around the circle created by the gun wound, and his finger went and touched there, and fresh blood started flowing out. And this is what we have seen in the last video. I hope that is clear to you all. And now let's continue with the footrest. Oh, how he is bleeding, Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mists screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fisherman had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at an end. What shall we do with this man? Sadao muttered. But his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could to stanch the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Okay, my dear students, over here, when his finger touched the wound and the blood started coming out, Hannah, very in a sad voice, she whispered and she said, "Oh, he is bleeding." And by now the mist screened them now completely. Mist screened them means it has become all foggy and misty, and it has covered not only the island, the pine trees, Sadao's house, even Sadao and Hannah too. And there was no one all around. That was the time when no one comes towards the beach side. The fishermen also, all of them, they go home, and that once in a while coming a beach side, those people also considering that the day has come to an end because the fog is covering everything, they also go off. So Sadao, he muttered, he spoke to himself, and he said, "What shall we do with this man?" Now, an enemy was lying down in front of them, so he just muttered to himself, and he said that what we are supposed to do with this man. Though he was saying this, but his trained hands, a doctor will be a doctor after all, so his trained hands on their own will, means like as if it was not under the control of Dr. Sadao, they were doing something so that they could stanch the fearful bleeding, they could stop this blood which was going on oozing out of that uncared wound of his. So what he did, on the side of the beach you might have seen the sea moss, that greenish color one, kai jaisa dikhta hai jo, that moss he took in his hand, and then he, like a patch, like how we put a bandage, like that only, like a patch he put on that wound from where the blood was coming out. The man, he mourned with pain. He just, in a low voice, he made the noise of the pain of having that pain in his stupor, means in his unconscious state itself, but he did not wake up. The best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. Sadao said, "What should we do with this man?" Then Sadao came up with an answer, like as though he was answering to his own question, not waiting for Hannah to answer. He said, "You might feel that it is so ruthless of him to say so, but there were many reasons behind it." He said, "The best thing is that we should push him back into the water. From where he came, let us put him back into the water." So Hannah said that, "Yes, I too think that is the best thing for this man." My dear students, remember, he was on the Japanese land and he was an American, an enemy. And when we talk about the Japan army and their torturing techniques, it's little, not only little, it is highly brutal. So if this enemy comes into the hand of the Japanese army, you just think what will happen to him. So it was not wrong on Sadao's part to say that let's push him back into the water, and Hannah agreed. But she was continuously staring at that motionless body. That man was totally unconscious. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turn him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. See, this is what I said. Sadao was a Japanese, but a kind-hearted man, and above all, he was a doctor. He said that if I take this white man home, if I give him shelter, if I harbor him, then what will happen? We will be arrested. And if I give off this man, this prisoner in this state, into the hands of the army, he will certainly die. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said. But neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. "What is he?" Hannah whispered. So when Sadao said that these are the two reasons why to push him back into the water, Hannah said that yes, definitely. The kindest thing will be to put him back into the water. But though both were talking about putting him back into the water, neither of them moved from there. None of them were moving him into the water. They were just standing there with curiosity. They were curious repulsion upon the inert figure. I mean, it's a kind of an not that friendly expression. They were looking at this inert figure, not moving one. "What is he?" Hannah whispered. What is he means she mean to say that definitely he's a man, he's an American, but whether any other identity of his. "There is something about him that looks American," Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, there, almost gone, was the faint lettering. "A sailor," he said, "from an American warship." He spelled it out. "U.S. Navy." The man was a prisoner of war. Okay, now who is this man? There is something that tells us that he's an American, he said. And he took that battered cap. You remember I told you about the cap in the previous video also, and now also in the revision part I said about the cap. Cap looked very old, like rag. And when he picked up that cap, in that it was written, though the letters were fading out from long time, so it was fading out, he was a sailor. Sailor means he belonged to the American Navy, a warship. Now the shock was that he was a prisoner of war, POW. "He has escaped," Hannah cried out softly, "and that is why he is wounded in the back," Sadao agreed. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, "Come, are we able to put him back into the sea?" "If I am able, are you?" Sadao asked. When he discovered that he found out his identity, that he's an American warship sailor and he has ran out from the prison. Hannah said that he is an escapist. He is a prisoner of war and that is why he is wounded. And Sadao said, yes, that's why he's wounded at the back. They both hesitated looking at each other and Hannah said that, come on, let us put him back into the sea. That will be the best thing. And then Sadao said, okay, even if I am able to do that, whether you'll be able to do that? From the very beginning of the chapter, my dear students, I have been stressing on humanity above all virtues. This humanity only has made the world to exist even now, otherwise it would have perished long time back. So here Sadao said that, okay, even if I do so, I push him back into the water, you'll be able to do it? No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone? Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy. But he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, now Hannah, when he asked that even if I am able to throw him in the water, whether you will be able to do it? Hannah said, no. Can't you do it alone? Then Sadao, he hesitated a little. Hesitation for what? The hesitation was for this reason, that he says that if the man would have been a whole, W-H-O-L-E, whole. Here whole means in a fit condition, healthy condition, not wounded, he would have definitely handed him over to the police. Because he has no feelings for him. He is his enemy. All Americans are his enemy. But then he said that he is just a common fellow. And then he started describing him, that see how foolish he is looking, his face you see, and he is wounded. To that, you also cannot throw him back to the sea? Hannah said. Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house. Okay, so Hannah understood. Dr. Sada also cannot do that. So when he started giving all that description, he said that cannot, because he is wounded. Hannah said that you also cannot throw him back into the sea. So now only one option is there. Let us come out of this dilemma and carry him back home. Now when she said carry back home into their house, Sadao, but the servants, Sadao inquired. We must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police. We must. As indeed we must, Sadao, we must think of the children and your position. It could endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war. Certainly, Sadao agreed. I would not think of doing anything else. Now when they have agreed that they cannot throw him back into the water and want to take him to their house, Sadao inquired from Hannah, what about the servants? They got Japanese servants. And to that she gave an answer that we will tell them. Very in a simple manner, we will just tell them that our intention is to give him to the police people. That definitely we will do. Why? Because if we don't do that, it will not only put your position into danger, but the life of the entire family into danger. So we have to give this prisoner of war into the hand of police. To that Sadao said that definitely, I agree, I will be doing that only. I am not thinking anything else. He said to Hannah. Now let us see how they carried that man to their house. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time until it is only feathers and skeleton. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own house sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed. Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk and the lining was pure white silk. "He's so dirty," she muttered. She murmured in distress. Okay, now they carried the man. They both lifted the man, and he was very light in weight. And an example is given that, like a fowl which has been starving from so long that only the feather and skeleton is left, no flesh. After they carried him, his arms were hanging down, and they carried him up the steps. And from the side door, they entered into the house. The door opens into a passage, a kind of a corridor. And then they took him down the passage and carried him to the empty bedroom which was there. Actually, this bedroom, it belonged to Sadau's father, and from the time he died, it has not been used up. They entered into the room and they kept that man, means they laid the man on the matted floor. In movies and all, you might have seen the Japanese house and all, how it is. The floor will be heavily matted, means mattress will be there, down flooring will be there, and they don't use generally those chairs and all those things. Down sittings only they prefer. And this father of Sada was a traditional Japanese, a strict Japanese, and he never liked using even a chair also to sit down, or a foreign bed least. So they made him lie down on that matted floor, and then Hannah went to the cupboard over there and she took out one quilt from there, one nice soft quilt. Quilt, you all know what a quilt is, Rajai jo aap dalte hain. And she hesitated little. Ladies now, they are like that only, because the quilt was very beautiful. It was having flowered silk, and the cloth was pure white silk. So she was little hesitant to put it over that man, because she said in distress that he's so dirty. So how to put so beautiful quilt over the dirty man? And then the further thing I'll be taking in the next video. Till then, goodbye and stay safe.